Entire families vanished in broad daylight, not in wars between nations, but under flags that promised protection. In less than a generation, courtrooms tried to erase what survivors could not. 17 people were shot in Baghdad traffic, mothers and children gunned down on a rumor, lives ruined by the very hands sent to secure them. The world remembers these as isolated tragedies, but what if that's only part of the truth? Here are the crimes the history books tried to hide and what the official reports won't admit start to finish. Baghdad, September 16, 2007. A Blackwater convoy, call sign Raven 23, pushes through Nisor Square in broad daylight. Armored trucks block traffic from all sides. Without warning, automatic gunfire erupts. Panicked drivers slam on brakes. Some abandon their vehicles and run. In the middle of the chaos, a white Kia sedan sits trapped. Inside, a mother tries to shield her 9-year-old son. Both are shot dead before they can open a door. 17 civilians are killed, 20 more wounded. Witnesses later describe bodies slumped over steering wheels, children bleeding out in their parents' arms, and glass shattered by bullets that never stopped. Iraqi police and bystanders recall no incoming fire before the shooting began. Ballistics experts and FBI investigators comb the scene for days. Their findings are stark. 14 of the 17 deaths had no possible justification, no threat, no warning, no weapons found among the dead. Blackwater claims an ambush, but the evidence tells a different story. Shell casings litter the intersection clustered around civilian vehicles. The mother and child in the Kia become symbols of the day's horror. One Blackwater guard, desperate to stop the slaughter, points his weapon at a fellow contractor, yelling for him to cease fire. The shooting slows, then stops, but the damage is done. As news spreads, outrage erupts across Iraq. The United Nations calls for accountability. The U.S. government launches an investigation. In 2014, 4 Blackwater contractors are convicted in U.S. federal court. 1 is convicted of murder, 3 are convicted of manslaughter and weapons charges. The trials reveal radio confusion, disregard for orders, and a chain of command that left lethal force in private hands. Appeals drag on for years. Then, in December 2020, President Trump issues full pardons for all 4 men. Iraqi officials call the act a betrayal. Survivors and families of the dead receive no justice, no apology, only a legal erasure of the verdicts. The Nisor Square massacre exposes the dangers of unchecked power and the blurred lines between military and private force. The image of the bullet-riddled Kia frozen in Baghdad traffic stands as a silent witness to what happens when contractors operate above the law and when the promise of security becomes a license to kill. On November 19, 2005, the sound of a roadside bomb shattered the morning in Haditha. The blast tore through a Marine convoy, killing Lance Corporal Miguel Terrazas and wounding 2 others. Within minutes, Marines fanned out, weapons raised, searching for anyone they believed responsible. A white taxi approached the scene carrying 5 unarmed men. The Marines ordered them out, then opened fire, killing all 5 where they stood. Marines moved through nearby houses, kicking down doors, shouting commands in English that terrified families could not understand. In 3 separate homes, they shot and killed 19 more civilians, women, children, and the elderly. Toddlers died clutching their mothers. A 9-year-old girl, Iman Walid, survived by playing dead beside her slain relatives. She later described the moment her mother was shot in front of her, the chaos of bullets and screams, the silence that followed. Iman Walid is a survivor. The first official report told a different story. Marine officers claimed that 15 civilians had died in the initial improvised explosive device blast, their bodies supposedly torn apart by shrapnel. But when local human rights worker Tahir Thabet arrived with a video camera, he documented the wounds, neat bullet holes, not blast injuries. Blood pooled on floors, walls pocked with gunfire. Time magazine obtained the footage, and their investigation revealed the truth. These were not accidental deaths. They were executions carried out room by room. As evidence mounted, the Marine Corps launched Article 32 hearings and a high-profile investigation. Years of legal maneuvering followed. 8 Marines faced charges, but most walked free. Only Staff Sergeant Frank Wuterich, the squad leader, received punishment, a reduction in rank and pay. He served no jail time. The official justification, the claim that the civilians were killed by the bomb, was quietly withdrawn. But for the families in Haditha, the damage could not be undone. The massacre left behind more than bodies and broken homes. It left a record of how quickly violence could spiral, how easily the truth could be buried under paperwork and false reports. Iman Walid's story, captured in interviews and photographs, stands as a rare voice for the victims, a reminder that behind every statistic is a child who remembers everything. At Abu Ghraib prison in 2003, the official story was about security and order. Behind the walls, a different reality unfolded. Detainees were stripped, hooded, and forced into stress positions for hours. Guards blasted them with deafening music, deprived them of sleep, and left them naked in freezing cells or under burning lights. Dogs were used to terrorize, not to protect. Electric wires were draped over blindfolded men who were told they would be shocked if they moved. Sexual humiliation became routine, with prisoners forced to pile on top of each other or to crawl on leashes for the camera. This was not the work of a few rogue soldiers. The abuse was fueled by policies drafted far from the cell blocks. Legal memos from the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel, later called the torture memos, redefined prisoners as unlawful combatants. That label stripped them of Geneva Convention protections. The memos authorized techniques that had once been crimes: stress positions, sleep deprivation, exposure to extreme heat and cold, and waterboarding. These policies filtered down through the chain of command, blurring the line between interrogation and torture. Contractors played a central role. CACI International, hired to provide interrogators, operated with little oversight. One detainee, Manadel al-Jamadi, was brought in by CIA officers and CACI personnel. He died during questioning, shackled with his arms behind his back in a position known to cause asphyxiation. His death was ruled a homicide, but no one was ever charged. Photographs of his body, packed in ice and wrapped in plastic, became silent evidence of what happened in the shadows. As the first images leaked in 2004, the Army launched an internal investigation led by Major General Antonio Taguba. His report documented a pattern of sadistic, blatant abuse. 17 soldiers were removed from duty, 11 faced court-martial, and were convicted. Their sentences ranged from a few months to 10 years. No senior officers or civilian officials were prosecuted. The architects of the policies kept their jobs. The government argued that contractors could not be held criminally liable under existing laws. For years, survivors and families pressed for justice. Lawsuits against CACI dragged on in U.S. courts. In November 2024, a federal jury found CACI civilly liable for conspiring to torture detainees at Abu Ghraib, awarding millions in damages to 3 survivors. It was the first time a contractor was held accountable in a U.S. courtroom for post-9/11 torture. The verdict did not bring criminal punishment or a government apology. The scars, both physical and psychological, remain with the victims. Abu Ghraib became a symbol of what happens when cruelty is written into policy, when legal language is twisted to justify the unthinkable. The story of Manadel al-Jamadi, his name barely known outside the prison walls, stands for all those whose suffering was hidden behind bureaucratic language and locked doors. March 16, 1968. The village of San Mai, known to Americans as My Lai, wakes to the sound of helicopters and boots in the mud. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry, moves in on orders to root out Viet Cong. Within hours, the operation turns into a killing field. Soldiers drive villagers from their homes, force them into ditches, and open fire. Men, women, children, even infants. No one is spared. Some women are raped before being shot. The bodies pile up in irrigation ditches and along dirt paths. By the end of the day, between 347 and 504 civilians lie dead. The Army claims a major victory, 128 Viet Cong killed in action, but the truth is buried beneath official reports and silence. Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr., piloting an OH-23 helicopter, circles low and sees the horror unfolding. He lands between United States troops and terrified villagers. Thompson orders his door gunners, Lawrence Colburn and Glenn Andreatta, to train their weapons on United States soldiers. He tells them, if they open up on any more civilians, you fire on them. Thompson and his crew pull survivors from the carnage, airlifting them to safety. His radio transmissions record the chaos, disbelief, and his refusal to let the slaughter continue. Inside the village, not all soldiers participate. One, unable to stomach the killing, shoots himself in the foot to be evacuated. Others later testify to the indiscriminate violence and the orders to kill anything that moves. The Army's official story holds for more than a year. Then independent journalist Seymour Hersh uncovers the truth. Survivor accounts, photographs, and the testimony of Thompson and others forced the Army to launch an investigation known as the Piers Report. The cover-up unravels. 26 men are charged, but only Lieutenant William Calley is convicted. His sentence is life in prison, later commuted to house arrest. He serves 3 years at home. My Lai becomes a symbol of moral collapse in wartime. The massacre is not just a story of orders followed, but of one man's refusal to obey and his willingness to stand between the powerful and the powerless. Hugh Thompson Jr. is later recognized for his courage, but for decades, his actions draw anger from fellow soldiers and commanders. The bodies in the ditches, the faces of the survivors, and the testimony of those who tried to stop the killing remain as evidence that even in the darkest moments, conscience is possible. The Army's claim of 128 enemy dead stands in the records, but the names of the villagers, children, mothers, elders tell the real story. The official reports are filed away, but the photographs and memories remain a permanent record of what happened when the line between enemy and civilian was erased. In the Mekong Delta, December 1968 to May 1969, the United States Army's 9th Infantry Division launched Operation Speedy Express. Helicopter gunships swept over flooded rice fields, unleashing rockets and machine gun fire on villages below. Artillery barges pounded suspected enemy positions, and entire hamlets vanished in clouds of smoke. The goal was simple: deliver the highest possible body count. Official records claim nearly 11,000 enemy killed in just 6 months, but only 748 weapons were recovered, a ratio that raised alarm even inside Army headquarters. Field officers and the Army Inspector General teams began to question the numbers. Their internal memos, later declassified, estimated that between 5,000 and 7,000 of the dead were unarmed civilians, men, women, and children caught in so-called free fire zones. These were areas where any movement could be, and often was, treated as hostile. Villagers who stayed to tend their crops or who fled too slowly found themselves in the crosshairs of gunships and artillery. Captain David Hackworth, a decorated officer, later testified before Congress, "I was building a mountain of innocent dead to satisfy the body count system." Division commanders demanded results. The pressure filtered down the chain of command, turning every patrol into a numbers game. The more bodies counted, the closer a unit came to promotion, commendation, or simply escaping blame for a war that was slipping out of control. Newsweek's 1972 investigation, Pacification's Deadly Price, drew on Army records, hospital logs, and interviews with survivors. Reporters found that 3/4 of the civilian injuries at Mytho Hospital were the result of American firepower. Villagers described gunships circling overhead, spraying bullets into fields where families hid in irrigation ditches. In the aftermath, bodies were collected and labeled as enemy, regardless of age, gender, or dress. Army medical officers quietly admitted that the vast majority of casualties were non-combatants. The Inspector General's report, buried in archives for decades, confirmed what many already suspected. The drive for body count had turned the Delta into a killing field. Commanders knew that the numbers did not add up, but the official story, thousands of enemy dead and few American losses, remained on the books. For survivors, the only record was the graves left behind and the silence that followed. The true cost of Speedy Express was measured not in victories, but in the lives erased by a policy that rewarded numbers above all else. October 12, 1941. In the town of Stanislaw, now Ivano-Frankivsk, Ukraine, dawn broke with an order that would empty the Jewish quarter. German police units, led by SS officers and aided by Ukrainian auxiliaries, forced thousands from their homes at gunpoint. Families clung to each other as they were driven through the streets, past neighbors' windows, toward the old cemetery on the town's edge. The roundup spared no one. Children pulled from beds, elders in nightclothes, teachers and rabbis singled out and beaten. By midday, a field outside the cemetery held between 10,000 and 12,000 people. Guards shouted commands separating men from women, parents from children. The first to be called out were the town's rabbis, doctors, and teachers. Each was marched to a pit, shot, and left where they fell. The shootings continued without pause. German reports from that day would later describe the event as a successful liquidation. The language was cold and clinical, a bureaucratic phrase to erase an entire community. Survivors remembered the confusion and terror. Some described being ordered to strip before facing the guns. Others spoke of mothers trying to shield their children, of people clutching prayer books or family photographs in their final moments. A few managed to escape by crawling beneath bodies or pretending to be dead, lying motionless for hours as shots rang out above them. One survivor later recalled the sickening weight of having to step over neighbors and relatives to avoid detection. The massacre began in the early morning and lasted until nightfall. By sunset, the field was silent except for the wounded and the cries of those searching for loved ones. The next day, German officials filed their report. The operation had been carried out in an orderly manner, with no mention of names or faces, only numbers: 10,000, 12,000, the official record reduced to a line on a page. Very few of those responsible ever faced trial. Most returned to their posts, their actions justified by the same bureaucratic language that had ordered the killings. For the survivors, memory became the only justice. Today, memorial stones in Ivano-Frankivsk bear the names of some of the lost, but most were never recorded. The cemetery field remains marked by silence and the knowledge that an entire community was erased in a single day, its destruction explained away in a report, its suffering hidden behind the words successful liquidation. In late July 1950, as North Korean forces pushed south, streams of refugees fled the fighting, families with bundles and children in their arms searching for safety along the tracks near No-Gun-ri. American commanders, fearing enemy infiltrators hidden among civilians, issued a cable from 8th Army headquarters that read, "No refugees will be permitted to cross battle lines at any time. Movement of all Koreans in groups will cease immediately." The order reached the 7th Cavalry Regiment, dug in near a railway viaduct. Soldiers were told to stop anyone approaching, and some were told to fire. On July 26, the first shots rang out. U.S. planes circled overhead, strafing the crowds below. On the ground, troops opened fire on refugees gathered under the bridge, men, women, the elderly, and hundreds of children. For 3 days, the shooting continued. Survivors remember the cries echoing beneath the stone arches and the desperate search for water in a stream turned red. Children hid behind the dead, clutching at their mothers. One boy later described watching his sister die beside him, unable to move or speak for fear of being seen. When the guns finally fell silent, the ground was littered with bodies. The South Korean government later confirmed at least 163 dead or missing, with 55 wounded. Survivor groups and local researchers put the toll far higher, closer to 250 or even 300, nearly half of them children. For decades, the story remained buried. Veterans kept silent, survivors feared retribution, and official records disappeared into archives. In 1999, a team of Associated Press reporters uncovered declassified Army cables and interviewed both survivors and American veterans. Their investigation revealed not only the shooting, but the orders that made it possible. "Fire on everything, kill 'em all," one soldier recalled. The 8th Army's July 26 directive, found in the National Archives, confirmed that lethal force against refugees was authorized at the highest levels. The Pentagon's own review, completed in 2001, admitted that U.S. troops fired on civilians at No-Gun-ri and found American bullets embedded in the tunnel walls. Yet the official statement called it an unfortunate tragedy and denied any deliberate intent. President Clinton issued a formal apology, but no one was charged, and the Army insisted the deaths were accidental. For the villagers, the bridge became a graveyard. For the survivors, children who outlived their parents and mothers who lost everything, the memory remains. The orders were written in cables, the bullets in stone, and the silence that followed lasted nearly 50 years. Dawn breaks over the plains of Colorado, November 29, 1864. Along the banks of Sand Creek, hundreds of Cheyenne and Arapaho families gather in a village led by Chief Black Kettle. Months earlier, Chief Black Kettle had traveled to Denver to negotiate peace, returning with assurances from U.S. officials. That morning, he raises 2 flags above his lodge, a large American flag given to him as a symbol of trust, and beneath it, a white flag for surrender. Most of the warriors are away hunting. The village is filled with women, children, and elders. Suddenly, the ground trembles under the boots of nearly 700 Colorado volunteers led by Colonel John Chivington. The soldiers fan out in a line and open fire. Black Kettle stands outside his lodge, waving the flags, shouting for peace. Rifle shots cut through the cold air. Soldiers charge on horseback, firing into tippies, chasing down those who flee into the dry creek bed. Some women clutch infants as they run. Children hide in holes dug along the bank. The killing is methodical, no distinction between the defenseless and the few who try to resist. When the shooting stops, the violence turns to desecration. Soldiers move among the bodies, scalping the dead. They cut off fingers to steal rings, take ears and genitalia as trophies. One officer later writes home, describing men parading through Denver with pieces of human flesh displayed as souvenirs. Survivors recall the horror of watching their loved ones mutilated, their homes set ablaze. Not everyone follows orders. Captain Silas Soule refuses to let his men fire, standing aside in protest. In a letter to his fiancée, he describes the scene: children on their knees, begging for mercy, shot at point-blank range. Soule's testimony becomes central to the investigations that follow. He tells Army and congressional committees what he saw, naming those responsible. 5 months later, Soule is murdered on a Denver street. Many believe it is retribution for his refusal to stay silent. At first, newspapers hail the attack as a victory over hostile tribes. But as word spreads, outrage grows. 3 separate government investigations follow, including a joint committee on the conduct of the war. Testimonies describe the massacre in detail: the ignored flags, the slaughter of innocents, the mutilation of bodies. The committee calls the attack a foul and dastardly massacre, naming Chivington and his officers as responsible. Yet no one is prosecuted. Chivington resigns before he can be court-martialed. The army condemns the attack, but the men return home as heroes in the eyes of some settlers. Black Kettle survives, but the promises made to him are broken. The village is gone, its people scattered. The pattern is set: peace overtures met with violence, surrender signals ignored, and trophies taken as proof of conquest. The Sand Creek Massacre stands as a warning, a moment when the symbols of trust and surrender were trampled beneath the boots of power, and justice was left to fade on the open plains. In the spring of 1901, General James Franklin Bell arrived in Batangas with orders to crush the last Filipino resistance. His strategy was blunt: force the entire civilian population, nearly 300,000 people, into guarded camps surrounded by barbed wire. Soldiers set fire to villages, destroyed food stores, and shot anyone found outside the camps without a written pass. The countryside emptied, leaving only ashes and the echo of gunfire. Inside the camps, disease spread quickly. Cholera, smallpox, beriberi, and plague swept through the crowded enclosures. Food was scarce, water often contaminated. Army medical logs recorded 8,350 deaths in just a few months. In some districts, 1 out of every 5 people died. Letters from soldiers spoke of hunger and hopelessness, describing children too weak to stand and entire families wiped out by fever. General Bell justified his actions in letters to Governor William Howard Taft and Secretary of War Elihu Root. He wrote that depriving the enemy of food and shelter was as effective as shooting them. He called the camps protected zones, claiming they would shield loyal Filipinos from guerrilla violence. But the reality was a deliberate campaign to break civilian support for the insurgency by making survival itself a daily struggle. The rules were clear: anyone caught outside the wire without a permit could be shot on sight. Troops patrolled the countryside, torching fields and hunting for stragglers. Bell's orders left no room for mercy. Movement in and out of the camps was tightly controlled, and the destruction outside the wire made escape impossible. When news of the suffering reached Washington, congressional hearings were held. Army spokesmen insisted the policy was humane, but medical officers and witnesses described the appalling conditions and the soaring death toll. Some compared Bell's methods to the Spanish reconcentration camps in Cuba, policies the United States had once condemned as barbaric. By the time the camps began to empty in April 1902, the damage was done. The official death toll stood at 8,350, but the scars ran deeper. Survivors returned to villages that no longer existed, fields stripped bare, and families forever divided. General Bell's campaign in Batangas remains one of the deadliest counterinsurgency operations in American history, a strategy built not on battlefield victories, but on the systematic deprivation of an entire civilian population. War crimes do not vanish with time. Today, U.S. military contractors still operate with limited oversight, and legal barriers shield officials from prosecution. As new conflicts emerge, the precedent of impunity endures. Accountability is not just about the past, it is a safeguard for the future. The cost of forgetting is measured not in history books, but in lives left unprotected when power escapes scrutiny.